Hey guys, Taki here. We've been looking at high-end Snapdragon hardware over the last few months, and we have another powerful device to take a look at today. This thing features the new Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 processor, which has enough power to handle just about anything that's out there for Android at this point, from GameCube all the way up to Switch. Like most of the recent Snapdragon releases, this is one that will get better with time as open source drivers release and allow us to emulate PC games, but right now, it's pretty awesome. Let's get started with the specs. The ROG Phone 8 Pro comes with the latest Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 processor. This is the highest spec device that I own with this processor, and it comes with an absurd 24 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM. This is physical RAM, and you will be hard-pressed to max this out with the current software that is available on Android. For storage, we have 1 terabyte of UFS 4.0, which gives us plenty of space to store a large collection of ROMs across all of the systems that this hardware can handle. The only other spec that stands out is the 165Hz AMOLED display with a resolution of 2400 by 1080. All of this runs on Android 14. Let's start by doing a quick overview of some of the hardware on this. This is actually not the only ROG phone that I own. I also own the ROG Phone 1, and an interesting fact for all of you out there is that this phone was used extensively during the R&D stage of Udon. This was used as a comparison basis for a lot of the low-level system configuration, as well as some of the software ideas that were later improved upon in Udon. Anyway, if we look at both of these side by side, there's an obvious shift in design language from the first iteration to this latest one, and you can see that play out very clearly by looking at the back. If we just remove this logo and some of these tags along with this company logo over here, you wouldn't really notice that this was a gaming phone with this color option. Even with those, it doesn't stand out that much from modern phones, and I think that's what they were going for. The first one was no doubt a gaming product, but that segment of the market is super competitive now, and the user base just isn't as big as the mainstream market. From that standpoint, it kind of makes sense to create a better version of a mainstream phone with a lot of the gaming features that you wouldn't find in those phones, and then hope for the best. One of those features is a second USB Type-C port that opens up some unique possibilities with specific types of controllers. The primary USB port is on the bottom, but it's over to the side. As you can imagine, this is not going to be ideal for some of the Type-C controllers that are out there that are popular, but I have to imagine that they're aware of this. This is par for the course with gaming phones these days, but this guy also does not have any support for an SD card slot. I know some of the reasons why they don't add this functionality into a gaming phone, but I kind of wish that they would because it makes it easier to move a ROM collection from device to device. On the side edge, we have 2 pressure-sensitive air triggers that can be configured in software. I'll show this off later on in the video. One thing that I like about this back half, beyond the physical texture, is this customizable LED array. This is not super useful when you're in a game, but it is a cool touch, and it can show some useful information at a glance if you tend to leave your phone face down on a surface. If you're feeling creative, you can add your own animations to this, or you can just animate text. It's not going to give us that RGB FPS increase, but it is pretty cool. The next thing that's worth talking about here is the 165Hz screen. This thing is competing with phones that have a refresh rate from 60 to 120 Hz. Going from 60 to 120 is a big jump in supported games, but going from 120 to 165 is not that noticeable. There are also not a ton of games that are going to allow you to select a refresh rate that high. But when you do find one that lets you uncap the FPS, yeah, it looks pretty amazing. Here we have Minecraft Java Edition with the settings maxed out at 11 chunks. I'm standing on a pillow right here so we can get a better view of the scenario, and you can see the FPS in the corner, and we're easily able to get over 165 FPS in this game. Outside of stuff like this, the main place where you'll see this benefit is just in system navigation. This won't benefit us when we switch over to emulation. For Android games, most of the titles that you'll see will be locked to 30, 45, or 60 FPS. You will notice one thing about this screen, and it's that this game is not full screen. There are a few different ways that you can display content on this system. You can go full screen, shift over from the front-facing camera, or just crop into the center like I have it here. When you find a game that works well with a full screen view, it looks awesome, especially if you can find a game that will allow you to play it over 120 FPS. Obviously, we don't have any internal cooling on this, and depending on how you use it, it can get pretty hot to the touch. We'll talk more about that in just a bit. ROG uses external coolers for their gaming phones, and this one is the latest. This one is going to work like a standard cooler, but it does have the ability to be controlled by the Android system itself. This thing has 2 physical buttons on the top, along with an RGB light and the cooler. The bottom of this has a Type-C port for charging and for powering the coldness mode on this, along with a headphone jack. We also have a stand to prop this up on a table. The unfortunate thing about this is that this would make a decent performance dock, but those ports would need to be located on the back. The second thing is that this Type-C port does not allow you to use DP video out, and you also can't do that from the side port. So there's no hope to use this in a console mode with this as the active cooling. When you're ready to use it though, all you need to do is just clip it into place, slide that down, and then it should tell you that you're in a cooler mode. If you interact with the system UI and you go over here to this, you'll be able to toggle a few modes without supplying additional power. Between the highest and the lowest settings that you can use like this, we use about 0.8 watts of power. If you play games that need screen mapping and you don't want to use a full controller, the two buttons on the back of the cooler work well once you map them to the in-game options. Thankfully, the controller that I'm going to use for almost all of this video already has a cooler built into the back, and it works very well, and it also does not stop me from being able to do video output if I want to. Even though I won't be using it in this video, I still want to test the effectiveness of this cooler. Right now I have this sitting in kind of like a torture test. I have the clocks maxed out as much as the software will allow me to, but I'm just going to leave this here and wait a while until it throttles and then check the readings. That didn't take that long. If we look at the back, we can see that we now have a hot spot of 62 Celsius where the cooler would go, and we're at close to 50 Celsius at the edge. After using the cooler for about 15 minutes or so, there's not a big change on the front half, but the metal edge went down to around 50 Celsius from the mid to high 50s. I think the most valuable comparison that I can do in this video is to compare it to the Red Magic 9 Pro. I have the highest end version of the Red Magic 9 Pro, and I think I have the highest end version of the ROG Phone 8. Because these both have the same processor, benchmark scores are not going to be that different. This one will be able to sustain that high performance a lot longer than this because it does have that fan in there that can ramp up very high. But for gaming situations, you can play the same kind of games on both of these without any problems. In terms of like the UI and the system, they both have their own strengths and weaknesses. They're also both supported by the manufacturer for about the same time. They've promised to do 2 major Android releases on this ROG phone. Red Magic will do at least 1 Android release, and then they'll just do security patches after that. All of the Red Magic phones that I have still get security patches to this date. They're just not that fast at doing the feature releases. Now, even though the hardware is the same, there are some things in the software that are not. The first major one that we have is the performance modes. So I have these both set so you can see all the information at a glance. If we swipe over on the Red Magic, you can see that we have a couple of different modes to go through. I have it on Diablo mode right now, but we also have balance and rise on Red Magic phones. On the ROG phone, we have something similar called the X mode, but we also have something called dynamic mode, which is kind of just like leaving things as a default, and then you also have a battery saver. So all of these things are similar, but the Nubia phones have something called Diablo mode, and that's going to lock all of your frequencies to the max clocks possible, and they will not go down unless the phone is going to be like reaching a critical temperature. So in this case, the Red Magic 9 Diablo mode can't run this game at 8x native. Doing this is kind of pointless, but I needed something that would stress both of these equally. If we use the X mode on the ROG phone, you can see that we don't have enough power to match the other phone, but we can go over here into this mode and then go into the advanced settings. In this new menu, there's a lot going on that I'm not going to go over, but I do just want to go over this custom profile feature. If I open this up, we now have a ton of stuff that you would typically only see on a rooted phone. You can customize just about anything that you want here, and I've never seen another phone that gives you this kind of control out of the box. This feature lets you do a lot of interesting things. So for example, I have a couple of profiles here. I have one that will max out the CPU. I have another one that will max out the CPU and the GPU. And then I have another one that will just leave everything at the minimum clocks possible to get the best battery life possible. And if I just select that profile, you'll see that all my clocks go to the minimum level. We obviously don't have enough power to play this game, but this shows you the level of customization that you have available to you here. The great thing about this eco mode that I have here is this is enough power to be able to emulate a ton of things, like way more than you'd expect, and a lot of Android games will run just fine. But this doesn't generate any heat, and the battery life is amazing. But let's just go over to my max profile, and again, this is kind of high level stuff, but max is essentially just allowing us to get the most power out of this that we can. Essentially, it should give us the same performance as the Diablo mode on the Nubia phone. The only problem is it doesn't allow us to set the CPU 7 to the highest clock of 3.3 gigahertz. As you can see, when I select it and then I back out, it will apply, but then it resets down to a lower frequency. Even though this game isn't running on either phone at 60 FPS, we can see what kind of impact this has. It's a small impact, but it is still there. The Red Magic phone is running at 54 FPS, but the ROG phone is running at 53 FPS because that CPU 7 isn't clocked as high as it should go. This should be something that's super easy for them to fix in software. But yeah, I wish other phones and other devices gave us this kind of control out of the box because there's a lot that you can do here. The other major difference between the two of these, beyond just like the refresh rate change, is how they handle video out. On the Red Magic phone, you have 2 different choices that you can go with. You can mirror your phone screen to an external display, or you can send a different video signal to an external display. This is obviously great if you want to turn this into a console, and they've also added some other software in here to make it more of a gaming console. On the ROG phone, you'll only be able to mirror your screen. You can use some external software to be able to give you like a DeX-like experience, but it's not as good as if ROG had just done this themselves. Personally, I hope ROG adds something like this in a software update because it would be a killer feature on this. In this section, let's take a look at some Android gaming performance performance on the ROG Phone 8. Even though we're rocking bleeding edge tech on this, you will be locked out of some graphical options in popular titles that opt for whitelisting specific phones. It's kind of unfortunate that app developers do this, but they do, and it sucks. Anyway, let's get into the tests. For all of these games, I selected the highest graphical settings that the game would allow me to select, and I used my custom max CPU and GPU profile if I needed more performance.
Enemy. Defend yourself.
Ally slain. Enemy slain.
Taylor, good morning.
Ripley, it's certainly not good. I very much doubt it's morning either.
The twins. I'm right here. Verlaine!
Before today, I've only ever filmed an emulation test on an 8 Gen 3 processor one time, but I wanted a bigger variety of games for this showcase. This processor is extremely powerful, and if you customize it with the custom CPU and GPU controls, you can make it very efficient. For example, with PS1 set to 9x internal resolution, we can get between 18 and 22 hours of battery life with the brightness set to 80%. That's crazy. Anyway, we're going to skip over a lot of the lower end systems because they'll all run flawlessly on this hardware. Our first system for this section is 3DS with the Citra emulator. I have the rendering resolution set to 4x native, and we're using the Vulkan backend. From this point forward, I will aim to use my max CPU and GPU profile for the rest of the test just to get a best case representation of this hardware at this time.
No signs of life, but I feel like something's here.
Hey!
There was a recent update to the Vita 3K emulator on Android, so I wanted to do a quick showcase of it on this 8 Gen 3 processor. With the exception of this first title, these games will run at 1x native resolution.
Drake's been spotted in the upper chamber. Kill him on sight. Dante's orders.
Now let's take a look at GameCube Emulation. I targeted 4x native resolution using OpenGL and the official Dolphin emulator for these titles. That gave me better performance than Vulkan for some of the games that I wanted to test. Even though we have a ton of power here, there are some games that still push this hardware.
Excellent, Rogue Group. We'll take it from here.
Commander Skywalker, we've got Imperial walkers approaching from the north.
For Wii, we're sticking with the official Dolphin emulator at 4x native resolution.
La invasión empezó.
We only have a handful of games for this PS2 section. For this, I'm using the latest public build of the Aether SX2 emulator, and I have these games running at 4x native.
Request priority medevac on my location. Don't let him open the door!
Gadgetron's Omniwave 8000 includes a new comic feature. To act
Our last system for this video is Switch. This is one that's not great right now, but it will be in a few months from now. At this point, you'll face a mix of things. Some simple games will run without any issues at all. Other games will have rendering issues or missing graphics, as is the case with this Doom Eternal footage. Other games will look fine, but they won't work correctly. And another selection of games will run fine except for some heavy flickering. Skyrim is the biggest offender of this that I've ever seen. Even though this game would be running very well in this footage without that flickering issue, it's not stable and it can randomly crash. Crashing is the biggest issue that you'll find across the board, so I wouldn't play any games on this that don't allow you to make frequent saves because it's just not worth it at this time. But Switch is currently the pinnacle of what this hardware can do. A couple months from now, you'll see Snapdragon 8 Gen phones plowing through semi-modern PC games, but right now, Switch is the king. But that's going to wrap it up for this review of the ROG Phone 8. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to see more 8 Gen 3 coverage, take a look at a recent video that I did on the Red Magic 9 Pro. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.